We'll keep the program flowing. My name is Jessie Brunner. I'm the Senior Program Manager of the WSD Honda Center for Human Rights and International Justice here at Stanford. Our center aims to equip the next generation of leaders with the skills to protect and promote human rights and dignity for all. And one of the ways we do that is by working with our students, including many of whom are here, as well as those in our minor in human rights, to really tackle some of the thorny questions that are being raised today. Given that, it's truly a pleasure for me to introduce and moderate this mini-keynote session, which features 3 speakers who will get at some of the problems, areas of progress, as well as potential solutions to some of the outstanding challenges around fairness and bias in AI. I'd like to introduce all 3 of them now, and then I will invite them up to speak sequentially. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Londa Schiebinger. Londa is the John L. Hines Professor of History of Science here at Stanford, and also the Director of the Gendered Innovations in Science, Health and Medicine, Engineering, and Environment Project. She's a leading expert on gender in science and technology, an elected member of the American Academy of Sciences, as well as the recipient of numerous prizes and awards, including the Alexander von Humboldt Research Prize, as well as the Guggenheim Fellowship. Her work on gendered innovations harnesses the creative power of sex and gender analysis to enhance excellence and reproducibility in science and technology. You can learn more about her work on Twitter at @GenderStanford. The title of Dr. Schiebinger's mini-keynote is Addressing Gender and Ethnic Bias in AI. Next, we have Julia Dressel. Julia is a recent graduate of Dartmouth College, where she majored in both computer science and women's gender and sexuality studies. Her undergraduate research on recidivism prediction was published last year in Science Advances, and it's received a lot of press attention. I imagine many of you have seen it. She now leads software engineering at Recidiviz, a new technology nonprofit pursuing criminal justice reform nearby in San Francisco. Ms. Dressel will speak to us on the dangers of unfair and unintelligent AI. And finally, I'd like to introduce Judy Estrin. Judy is a networking technology pioneer and a Silicon Valley leader. She's co-founded 8 technology companies and served as CTO of Cisco Systems. As CEO of JLabs, her current role, she is an advisor and speaker in the areas of entrepreneurship, leadership, and innovation. And her recent focus is really on understanding the consequences of technology on society. She has served on the boards of the Walt Disney Company, FedEx Corporation, Sun Microsystems, Rockwell Corporation, KQED, and the Medium Corporation. She received her bachelor's in mathematics and computer science from UCLA and a master's degree in electrical engineering right here at Stanford. She is also the author of Closing the Innovation Gap, Reigniting the Spark of Creativity in the Global Economy. And her keynote is titled Friction, Progress, and Human Rights. I'd now like to invite our 3 speakers up to the podium.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm a historian of science, and as a humanist, I serve on the faculty design team for Stanford's new Human-Centered AI Institute. And I wanted to reinforce this point that interdisciplinarity is really important as we create artificial intelligence. It should be more inclusively like human intelligence. More importantly, so do I have my slides coming up? Where are my slides? Where's my changer? Is this it? Oh, okay, sorry. All right. Okay, great. So more importantly, I direct gendered innovations in science, health and medicine, engineering, and environment. We work with scientists and engineers to understand how to integrate sex and gender analysis into the design of research. So how can we get things right from the very beginning? I will respectfully disagree a little bit with Brad Smith. And the entire Stanford D School. I don't think we need to design something fail, which may have horrible social consequences, and then go back and redesign. I think we can understand how to create AI that promotes social equalities, and that is our purpose. In the past decade, Gendered Innovations has gone global. We've brought together over 200 scientists and gender experts in a series of collaborative workshops across the European Union, Canada, and the US. We've now expanded into South Africa, Japan, and South Korea, and are making our first forays this spring into South America, into Brazil and Argentina. Innovation is about integrating sex and gender analysis into the design of research. The operative question is, how can we harness the creative power of sex and gender analysis for discovery and innovation? Does considering gender add a valuable dimension to research? Does it take research in new directions? So today I'm going to talk about machine learning and robotics, if we have time. So let's dive in. And I start with a story. A couple of years ago, I was in Madrid and interviewed by some Spanish newspapers. I read a number of languages, but I don't read Spanish. So when I got home, I zoomed the articles through Google Translate to see what they had said about me. And I was shocked that I was referred to repeatedly as Londa Schiebinger. He said, he thought, and occasionally it wrote. Google Translate has a male default. So how can such a cool company as Google make such a fundamental error? Google Translate defaults to the masculine pronoun because he said is more commonly found on the web than she said. And this is the interesting part. We know this from Ngram, another Google product, that the ratio of he said to she said has fallen dramatically from its peak in the 1960s. You can see here the peak was 1968, when he said was 5 times more common on the World Wide Web than she said. And then there's a dramatic fall to the ratio of 2 to 1 in the 2010s. And what also happened at that time, we had the women's movement, we had NSF investing a lot of money into increasing the number of women in engineering and in science. We had a cultural revolution in language, and with one algorithm, Google wiped out 40 years of cultural change, and they didn't mean to. It was completely unconscious gender bias. So the fix, a couple of years ago, actually in 2012, Gendered Innovations invited Google and Stanford experts in natural language processing to a workshop. And the experts listened for about 20 minutes, and once they were sure I was not from another planet, they said, "We get it, we can fix that." So fixing is great, but constantly retrofitting for women or gender diverse people is not the best road forward. I had to ask myself, how was it that Google engineers, many of whom are educated here at Stanford, how did they get out of my institution without knowing the basics about gender analysis or any other social issues? This is something that we're trying to fix now. Yes, the students come over and take courses with me, but they have to come all the way over to history, away from engineering and computer science. So we're now trying to integrate into core engineering and computer science courses some basics about social analysis. So again, some products can be fixed, but what if Apple, Google, and other companies started product development research by incorporating gender analysis? What innovative new technologies, softwares, and systems can be conceived? So the point I want to make is that this unconscious gender bias from the past amplifies gender inequalities into the future. When a translation program defaults to he said, it amplifies the stereotype that men are active intellectuals by wiping out a woman in that role and replacing her with a phantom man. So this increases the relative frequency of the masculine pronoun on the web and may reverse hard-won advances toward gender-equal language. So it turns out that even though Google wanted to fix the problem, and that was already in 2012, they've been unable to. They released a very modest fix to their translation a couple of weeks ago, but if you put the text about me through the translate, you'll still get the same problem. Sometimes, once a platform is set, it's harder to fix, so you should get it right from the first. Importantly, Google Translate is creating our future As we know, technology, our devices, programs, and processes shape human attitudes, behaviors, and cultures. In other words, past bias is perpetuated into the future even when governments, the UN, universities, and companies themselves have implemented policies to foster equality. So the big question is, how can we humans intervene in automated processes to create the society we want? So there are many examples like this Google Translate examples of unintentional bias built into algorithms or software systems. And let's take this example, which we highlighted in our Nature comment last July. I call it the two-bride problem. These are images of two brides, one from North America and one from North India. A photograph of the traditional US bride dressed in white is correctly labeled bride, dress, woman, wedding. But the photograph of a North Indian bride is labeled performance art, red, costume. And why is this? Again, it's the issue of data. There's bias in the data. In this case, and I'll take ImageNet, which is a data set of 14 million labeled images, and which fuels a lot of computer vision. More than 75% of the ImageNet data comes from the United States, while as the United States represents only 4% of the global population, so a huge imbalance there. By contrast, companies like China and India contribute only 3% of the data in ImageNet, even though these countries represent 36% of the world's population. So we need data sets that appropriately represent global diversity. What is true of cultural bias is also true for ethnic bias. Recent applications of deep learning have successfully diagnosed skin cancer. So everybody is very excited about this. This is an app that can diagnose skin cancer, it's said, as well as physicians. But now we come to the problem. The data set is dominated by European Americans, and there are few images of people with darker skin. So whereas we know the app works, we don't know if it works for people with darker skin. And yes, people with darker skin get fewer skin cancers, but still they get skin cancers. And we need to make sure that our medical diagnoses app works for everybody. So again, we need to fix the data set. Now, gendered innovations, I've pointed out the problems, but we are solution-based. Solutions require interdisciplinary teams of computer scientists, lawyers, political scientists, historians, gender experts, all to optimize and guarantee fairness in algorithms. To this end, we had a workshop last March in 2018 on gender and fairness in machine learning. And there we wanted to identify exactly where in the machine learning process biases resided, whether it's in the data, whether it's in the predictive models, or how it's in the algorithms. And we wanted to map solutions, and we were also interested in discussing who should be involved in decision-making to fix these problems. If it's going to be computer scientists themselves, we need to fix the education for computer scientists. Maybe it will be teams of ethicists, companies like we heard this morning, or government oversight committees. Some of our results were published in this Nature paper in July, and all of our results you can see on the Gendered Innovations website under Machine Learning and Analyzing Gender. Here are a couple of the solutions. One is to do these data checks. So we discovered through this workshop that there are two national initiatives for data checks. One is Data Sheets for Dataset, which Brad Smith already mentioned, coming out of Microsoft. And the other is data nutrition labels. It's like food nutrition labels. You want to know what's in your food, you want to know what's in your data, and this one is coming out of Google. So first you fix your data. If you can't do that, then you need to look at how you can debias the algorithms. So if you go back to the problem of the translation problem I was talking about, you cannot fix the data because it's the corpus of the English language. So you can't mess around with that. Well, you can in certain ways, but I'm not going to talk about that. But here are some interesting solutions that were brought to our attention. First is counterfactual analysis. So if you consider, and this is one approach to evaluate gender bias in algorithms. So consider Google search, where men are 5 times more likely than women to be offered ads for high-paying executive jobs. The algorithm that decides which ad to show inputs features from the person making the query and outputs a set of ads predicted to be relevant. So the counterfactual would test the algorithm by changing the gender of each individual in the data and then studying how the prediction changes. And if simply changing an individual from a man to a woman leads to systematically high-paying jobs, then you know that you have a bias in the data and in the algorithm. Okay, I guess I'm out of time. All right, so I won't go through our second one, which is very, very cool. You can see all of this on our website. And I wanted to talk about robots, because it's very interesting how we gender these robots. And we have a challenge to designers of robots to understand how gender becomes embodied in robots and to design robots that promote social inequalities rather than promoting the vicious circle of returning your gender stereotypes to you, reinforcing those in the culture, and creating a society where we're living the 1950s all over again, deeply into the future. So instead of that, we want to promote a virtuous circle where robotics could be a catalyst for changing gender norms. First, roboticists have to understand what gender norms are. And this is why it's important to get this aspect of gender analysis into the engineering curriculum. If you want to keep up to date with new research in this area, you can join our listserv. Thank you.
Wonderful. I am Julia Dressel, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about the dangers of unfair and unintelligent AI. So courts across the country have begun using predictive software to inform decisions that are made in the courtroom. And what happens is data about a criminal defendant gets fed into an algorithm that outputs a risk score. And this risk score quantifies the likelihood that the defendant will recidivate or will go on to commit a new crime in the future. And these risk scores are then used in bail and can be used in even sentencing and parole decisions. About 3 years ago, spring of 2016, some investigative journalists at ProPublica reported on some troubling issues with a particular commercial software called Compass. Compass is built by a for-profit company called Equivant, and it has been used to assess over 1 million criminal defendants since it was built in 1998. What ProPublica found was that the mistakes that Compass was making were unfair to Black defendants. It found that Compass was almost twice as likely to predict that a Black defendant would reoffend when they actually wouldn't, and nearly twice as likely to predict that a white defendant would not reoffend when they actually would. So this means that a white defendant is more likely to be released on bail, even though they actually pose a threat, and a Black defendant is more likely to be denied bail, even when they don't actually pose a threat. And here's the thing. So people often really assume that algorithmic decision-making is inherently superior to human decision-making. And the criminal justice system has started to rely on tools like Compass because of this assumption that algorithms are smarter and less biased than the judges that are usually making these kinds of decisions. But when we read this article a couple years ago, we started looking and couldn't actually find any research that was proving that these algorithmic recidivism prediction tools were actually definitively superior to human recidivism prediction. And because of the very serious implication that a tool like Compass can have on a person's life, we wanted to actually confirm, is Compass outperforming human prediction? And so we ran a study to evaluate the baseline for human recidivism prediction and then assess whether or not Compass was actually beating that baseline. For the study, we used Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which you may know is an online crowdsourcing marketplace. You can pay people to perform short tasks. And the short task for our study, we asked participants to read a very small paragraph about an actual criminal defendant, and it contained some of their demographic information, their criminal history, and then the crime they had most recently committed. And after reading this paragraph, we asked them to predict, do you think this person will go on to commit a new crime or not? And after we gathered all of these human predictions, we were able to compare that human prediction to Compass's prediction on those same individuals. And we found that Compass was no more accurate than this group of people that we paid $1 to respond to this online survey. Compass's accuracy is around 65%, and the human accuracy was 67%. So this commercial software built by a for-profit company that is used in the courts currently and has been used for a while now was not more accurate than these people that were taking this survey who we assume have no criminal justice experience. And one of the concerns with using tools in the courtroom and with a lot of algorithmic technology is that they are a lot of the times what are considered black boxes. And in the courtroom, a judge will see a Compass score or another type of algorithmic risk score, and they don't know what components of a defendant's identity, criminal history, or the crime that they committed, what parts of them are being used to create these kinds of risk scores. And if you're a judge and you see a Compass score and you're told it's a proprietary algorithm and that and Equivant, the company that makes Compass, doesn't share the variables that Compass is built on or the data that it's built on because of claims that it is proprietary. And if you're a judge and you see that Compass is built by this proprietary algorithm, you're probably going to trust it a lot. But because these non-experts were able to match Compass's accuracy, we started thinking about the complexity of the algorithm. What was going on here, and how were these non-experts able to match this accuracy so easily? So we decided to try to reverse engineer the algorithm. We were able to match Compass's performance by building a super simple linear classifier that only looks at someone's age and the total number of prior crimes on their record. And this really shows that there's too much trust being put in this particular algorithm. And if a judge is looking at a score that's coming from something that's proprietary, and they've been hearing about the advances in AI and big data, and they think, oh, this probably should carry a good amount of weight. But if we told them that same score was only built by looking at these two variables, they're probably not going to trust that much. Or if we told them, oh, hey, we asked 20 people online, and they think this person will probably commit a new crime, so you should follow this score, they're probably going to throw that out also. And so it's really dangerous to be putting any trust into something that isn't actually as accurate or as fair as it says that it is. When we're thinking about the future of human-centered AI, I think that there are three pretty big priorities that we should be thinking about. And the first is transparency. Studies like this show that these kind of black box algorithms can't always be trusted, and that therefore there needs to be transparency in what variables are being used. Is it those 2 variables? Is it 7 variables? Is it 100? And what part of someone's identity is going into these kinds of algorithms? For there to be transparency, needs to be accountability. Whether it's something like this that's used in the criminal justice system, or it's another kind of technology that's used to make loan decisions, financial decisions, employment decisions, anything that is being used on a human and making an impact in somebody's actual life, there needs to be an accountability for the performance of the tool. And you can't assume that AI is going to be very accurate or very fair just because it sounds impressive and just because someone tells you it was built using a lot of data. And so there needs to be an accountability that a tool is actually performing. as it says that it is. And for that to happen, there needs to be regulation. And tools like Compass are currently implemented without any oversight or any regulation. And this is really dangerous because the people whose lives are impacted by this tool deserve to know whether something is accurate. There needs to be regulation for the accuracy of that tool and for the efficacy of that technology. And it's really dangerous to be putting our blind trust in something that is both unfair, like ProPublica showed this tool was, and not that smart, not that intelligent. I also think that if you are a technologist and you're building AI, or you are thinking about how to regulate AI, or you work at a company and your company is building AI, that there are 3 pretty simple questions you can ask about that technology. The first is it fair? And I know probably a lot of us are here because we know AI can be unfair. And so that is a very, very top level question of, is this tool fair? But the second is it actually accurate? Because we can't assume something is accurate, but just because we think that technology has gotten it to a place where it must be accurate. And any tool that's going to be effective should be able to pass a very simple test of, can it beat very simple human prediction, but it also should be able to prove that it is actually doing what it says it is before you use it in any real circumstance. But then I also think a bigger question to be asking is it just? And even if we can build something that is fair to everyone and that is highly accurate, is it a just use of that technology? And in the case of recidivism prediction, a defendant is potentially being punished for a crime that they haven't actually committed yet. And so even if we could make recidivism prediction that is fair to everyone and that is highly accurate, is that a just use of technology in that circumstance? And so I really think that we need to be focusing on, even if something is highly effective, is this the right place to be using technology in the first place? Is prediction even a good thing to be doing with someone's life in this particular circumstance? And as we're thinking about the future of human-centered AI, we should be focusing on only implementing technology that is ethical and just to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to be here. I am, my title is perhaps a little odd, but I want to talk about the role of friction in progress and human rights. But sitting here this morning, I was feeling a little intimidated to be talking about human rights in this group. So think of it as little h, little r, as opposed to the legal framework, because I am a technologist by training. I believe in human rights and contribute to organizations that do a lot in human rights, but I really don't have the perspective to be formally talking about that. What I'm not going to talk about is all of the incredible benefits that technology and digitization are bringing to us. I'm not going to spend any of the next couple of minutes talking about that, not saying that I don't believe in it, but I just think that to achieve the type of balance that we need in this age of digitization, we're not talking enough about our overall relationship to technology in a way that allows us to really think about the harms. Because it's not just the specific harms at any given time. Everything is moving so quickly that if we don't think about our relationship and the way we're thinking about technology, we're always going to be in the position, which we may anyway, most of the time, of being behind the fact. And there are certain things that you can't fix once you break them. You can't say, oops, I broke democracy. You can't say, oh, that AI system in the plane didn't work, and get back those lives. So whether it's human rights or whether it's a lot of other areas, we need to get our thinking in a way that can try to be more proactive. I thought I'd take 1 minute and talk about some of the implications today that we already know about that maybe we're not talking enough about. And so what I did is actually went to the UN declarations and just picked a few human rights and started to think about how some of the things that are happening today. And Eileen mentioned AI versus digitization today. AI is one of those funny terms that we already are experiencing the implications of AI or the machine learning AI in all of the applications that have been talked about, but also in our social media systems and everything else we do. It's machine learning that allows these systems to scale at the rate that they do. So AI is not an issue for the future. It's an issue that we have today. And the amplification of anxiety and fear, many people know about FOMO. I've come up with a term which is FO-less, which is the fear of losing economic or social status, which is a really big issue that we have today. Privacy is not just about data privacy, but our personal privacy. And the book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff is a really excellent view of how that is being impacted. We've talked already about biased data, and think about how that impacts our basic dignity. Freedom of thought, opinion, freedom of development and personality. Now, how is that being impacted? Well, personalization and recommendation engines are telling us how to think, telling us what we want. We may all say, well, it's not impacting us today, but what about our kids growing up with those technologies? Our intelligence, our cognitive functions are being degraded by simplification, lots of nuance, loss of critical thinking. Again, in all of us and our kids even worse. Our personal authority. In some ways, we've talked a lot about data and measurements, and but are we being reduced to just what can be observed and measured? Data should inform us, but data driving us reduces us as humans and as our capacities. And democracy, all of the issues I've just talked about, democracy relies on, in addition to, let alone, information, common set of facts, which we no longer see today. And I would argue that the path we're on today may be incompatible with democracy. So I think that we really need to be taking these things seriously. But let's go beyond some of the behaviors and symptoms and look at the overall relationship with technology. And what we've seen is a real paradigm shift, not just in technology, but in the culture of how we apply that technology. Social, mobile, cloud, sensors, artificial intelligence have revolutionized the way that we live today. But it's not the technology itself, it is how it is wielded and how we embrace it that is leading to an imbalance, a basic imbalance in power. So if you think about it, data and knowledge has become power, but it actually has become about dominance because you need the most amount of data, you need the most amount of processing in order to do AI-driven, apply AI in the way that we are today. And the culture of winner take all, how we reward companies is about dominating. It is not just about success. The notion of multi-level network effects, which is what venture capitalists look for when they invest in a company. Is this company going to become dominant? Does it have network effects that will keep everybody out? And these network effects, which the term came in terms of increasing value to the people it serves, to the consumers, often are increasing value to the provider of the services. The scale of data sets and infrastructure required to compete reinforces the power. So people talk about breaking up big tech, or not breaking up big tech, making big tech more competitive for small companies to come in. But a small company is not going to be able to afford the infrastructure or collect the variety and amount of data to compete against those companies. So we fundamentally have a set of technologies that are lending themselves to the powerful getting more powerful. And along with this, there's been a real shift in attitude in Silicon Valley. And I love a clip that Steve Jobs gave in the 80s in the beginning. See how old I am? I'm thinking back even further than that. But talking about when the personal computer came out. And he compared it to a bicycle. He talked about it as a bicycle for the mind. And the reason he used that analogy is someone had done a locomotion study of various species. And the condor came out number 1, and humans came out 17. Now, those people who know of Steve Jobs, he didn't like being 17. But the people who did that study then went and measured the efficiency of a human on a bicycle, and humans came out number 1. So that notion of a tool for the mind, a bicycle that makes us more efficient, was really the model of computing in that time. Fast forward to 2000 and today, and what's the motto that comes out of the leaders in the Valley? Software is eating the world. That's a different attitude. It is a different approach to technology. And what has happened is the entrepreneurial culture of the Valley has actually spread, along with digitization, to the leadership norms of other industries and other organizations throughout government, civic society, and companies. And for the good, it is innovative, but for the bad, because as I said, there are lots of things that you can't fix, and you need to be thinking about the consequences. Moving too fast, somebody can cause a lot of harm. We're all suffering from what I call no friction addiction. We have bought into, and this started with consumerism, it is not just about digitization, but what the tech industry has reinforced is buying into a view of a utopian view of what a frictionless world looks like. And on what that means, and frictionless means in terms of growth, but also in terms of human convenience. From an industry perspective, our norms, our incentives, push for maximum scale and speed. It is all about growth, and it's about short-term growth. And you have myopic measurements, myopic metrics that come in and focus on growth and make it so that the employees and people in the company don't even think about or don't have the time to consider the harm, to consider the responsible approach as opposed to the fastest moving growth. On the other hand, we the people are very complicit and very guilty in this. We love convenience. And so we want what we want now, and especially if we don't know the cost. And we see it as free when there are a lot of costs involved. And the combination, the interplay of these in terms of industry striving to make things frictionless so that we use it more and we engage more and we become more addicted and they grow faster, leads to essentially what I call a submissive, and it is, a submissive relationship to technology. And I'm not just talking about us. When I say us as users, I'm talking about us as academics. I'm talking about us as other industries. I'm talking about us as leaders. It is our responsibility to not just buy into a story in which short-term economic growth has us looking for the next big hit, the next big thing, and we just chase after it. We buy into a story of inevitability. The velocity, the complexity has us saying, stand back, don't ask any questions, you don't get it. Well, we need to start asking those questions and not buying into this utopian vision. Not that there's not a good vision, but there's a difference between a positive future, which embodies these technologies, and a utopian vision that makes us believe that, that there is no other option and we shouldn't want any other option. So one of the reasons why I'm so worked up about this today is that I believe that, that this is impacting not just economic issues and human rights issues, but our ability to solve some of the key challenges we have, such as climate change, basic inequality, which is only going to get worse with the future of work. These things require friction. And we can't just throw more technology and technologists at the problem, and maybe our innovation needs to be a little less narcissistic, and we need to focus on innovation for the sake of addressing these issues. I love this Einstein quote, it's one of my favorite, that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. And if ever we had a time to take this quote seriously, now is the time to do this. So let me start off by saying how do we embrace a different view of friction? Think about friction as something positive. It is the right amount of friction that is the difference between freedom and free fall. And think about that bicycle. Think about that bicycle. If you slam on the brakes too hard, you go over the handlebars. If you have no brakes, you'll fall down the hill. So it's the right amount of friction, and the right amount of friction is necessary in relationships. You don't have a relationship without being able to resolve friction, collaboration, leadership, democracy. What types of friction? What am I talking about? Rules and norms, guardrails. Everybody hates the term gatekeepers. Those, in various forms, that is friction, and that is friction that makes things work. Ethics. I would say that ethical leadership may be at times at odds with metrics-driven leadership, because ethics requires discretion. You have to take some time to think, not just expediency. That is a form of friction. When we talk about rights and responsibility, we have to think about autonomy and interdependence. The second part of each of those phrases is the friction that balances out the individuality or the rights. Cognitive functions are friction that stops us from just acting on our first impulse, or many of us, or people when they're not on Twitter. We need friction to be able to, or we need to be able to tolerate friction, to tolerate boredom, to tolerate discomfort, to make an effort. What happens in multiple generations if you have generations that are brought up to think that any effort should be avoided? That is the extreme of no friction addiction. How and where to apply requires a lot of nuance, especially when you're talking about technology. We have to be thinking about government and industry power. We seem to have shifted to a focus, and we used to focus mainly on protecting the internet from authoritarian governments. We need to remember that we also need to protect humans from these authoritarian technologies. Obviously, the geopolitical dynamics of the competitive nature in terms of different nations, things like free expression and hate speech. It is not at all easy to come up with mechanisms to regulate that won't trade off one or the other. Research, development, application, where do you impose the friction? Do you impose friction on research, or have research unfettered and impose restrictions on application? This is trickier in the AI field, and actually in most of technology today, because so much research is being done by for-profit corporations. Because of the resources involved, because of the lack of funding from other sources, it has become harder to do that. Do you provide friction on the behaviors or the underlying causes? Do you ask individuals to regulate their behavior, their use of technology, or on the systems? And I don't need to tell anybody in this room that thinks about human rights that balancing power requires ongoing vigilance. There is nothing here that is a one-time fix, but we're going to fix one thing and power is going to pop out somewhere else. And so this is an ongoing issue. Questioning is one of the most important forms of friction. We need to ask ourselves hard questions. I love solutions, but we have become too solutions focused. We don't ask ourselves questions if there isn't an answer. And there are some really hard questions here that we need to be having discussions on in order to even begin to start thinking of the answers. What do we value? Is there even a we that we can come up with a single set of values? How are we each responsible explicitly and implicitly in this imbalance in the relationship? We can do something, should we? Human-centered, this is one of my favorite ones. What does human-centered mean? Does it mean to humans, for humans, by humans? I think this, we really need to think about this. How do we define progress? How do we define quality of life, well-being? We can't put metrics around everything. And so how do you define these concepts? And a quote from, again, Shoshana Zuboff's book, which I love this quote, is who knows, who decides, and who decides who decides. And I will say that if we stop knowing ourselves, then obviously we are not ones that deciding, and it is the algorithms that are deciding and the people who write those algorithms who are deciding who is deciding. And then let me just finish by talking a minute about leadership. I think we really need to think about our leadership styles and norms as we navigate through an ever-changing world. And it is changing, as we all know, faster and faster every day. How do we truly become agile in this environment? Well, I went up, and everybody talks about agility, and Silicon Valley is the master of agility. But when you look up the definition of agility, it is the combination of balance, coordination, speed, reflexes, strength, and endurance. True agility. I would argue that today's focus and leadership styles is on speed and reflexes. We are reacting and going fast, moving fast to break things and then moving fast to fix things in an lasting cycle. And that leads to instability. That does not lead to a stable system of leadership. It also doesn't lead to a relationship of trust. We need progressive leadership. That's not a political statement. It's not progressive versus conservative. It's progressive versus regressive, that our current leadership systems are actually tapping into people's emotional systems and creating levels of, I would suggest, anxiety, that we regress emotionally as opposed to feeling a sense of stability that allows us to move forward. So what are those other characteristics? Strength is a strong core, ethics, values, secure enough to share power as opposed to dominating. Balance, we need to be responsive, not just reflexive and reactive, the right level of friction. We need to take a step back and think and breathe. Coordination, we need more systems thinking. We should be thinking about things in terms of teams and endurance. We've got to not just look at today, and yes, you need to think quickly, but think long game, and making sure that we're thinking about our immune systems of ourselves, of our organizations, of our kids. Immune systems not just from a physical perspective, but how do we build up the immune systems against disinformation, or our ability to fight off the next metaphorical attack that's coming. And the reason, again, I love this notion of a bicycle for the mind is not only does it make us efficient, but it is fun, it is good for you, it's good for the planet, and it keeps us in control as long as we apply the right kind of friction to the right places. Thank you. Do you want me to sit down? Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to thank our three speakers. We don't have time, unfortunately, to have a Q&A, but I imagine you can find people at lunch. I would say the common thread that I took from all three of your remarks is really the importance of critical thinking and being willing to serve as a bridge. You all are wonderful people who have crossed disciplines and who have knowledge across various fields, and I think the willingness to serve as a bridge and also interrogate a lot of our own assumptions is just really critical to all these conversations. So thank you all. Thanks.
So let me join. Well, I'll speak loud. I don't think this mic is on. Is it on? Yep. Okay. Thank you, Jessie. I just had to jump up here and say, Londa, Julia, Judy, remarkable, rich, really deep, thought-inspiring comments. And I also want to fess up to everybody. We had an algorithm wrong on our Eventbrite where we shut down letting people come 2 weeks ago. and I feel crushed because I wish everybody had heard every word out of your mouth. But I will promise you we will be promoting the video that we have captured of your remarkable comments, because I think the three of you have just added so much to this important global conversation that I have not heard before anywhere, and I hope you all spread the word. For right now, please join us. Welcome everybody outside. We are having lunch, and then we've got a couple of remarkable demos coming up about AI to combat some malign uses of AI at about 1 o'clock. So join us in the garden.